Ed, if you don't mind, we'll wait just a few minutes till we get to the yellow phase, and then you'll join Ed, okay? Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is our June 2020 Public Health and Safety meeting, and we are going to conduct this meeting without our police chief, who's attending his son's graduation. We send our congratulations. He did submit the monthly report. We also have our report from the fire department. Both of those are filed with the monthly business packet. So today on the agenda, we are planning to discuss the yellow phase reopening that is authorized by the governor on June 5th. And we'll discuss that in some detail. After that, we're going to discuss the carbon inventory with the EAC. But before we get to either of those, I would like to take a few minutes to discuss George Floyd unrest that is sweeping the nation. And I know some members of the committee will want to make a comment, and I want us to have a few moments at least to do that. I would like to also just make a public statement regarding one of our volunteer firefighters, who we thank for his many years of service. Our fire chief did suspend one of our volunteers because of a social media post that he made related to the George Floyd protests. We have a zero tolerance for racism in the borough, and my thanks to Chief Dixon for making the right call. I also want to extend my hand to the firefighter with the expectation, now that he's apologized and he has taken down the post, my expectation is that he will rejoin active duty at the chief's discretion. And I wanted to just make that public statement because we are a small town, and I know that things are circulating in social media. Would anyone else in the committee like to make a statement regarding the wave of protests in the nation at large? Mona, I know you did.
Sure. So I wrote a prepared statement because the recent events are so upsetting and I want to take care with my words. So I'm going to read it. My heart is in pain for George Floyd's family and for all people of color who are grieving and who have to live in fear of what might happen to their own family members. The murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer who knelt on his neck while other officers stood by and did nothing must be answered for. It was a public lynching. Police brutality is a symptom of the white supremacy that has plagued our nation since its founding, and we all must work to end the violence. So I want to start by saying that I am so grateful to have police officers Belfi, Dutton, Lynn, McCabe, and Vernaccio serving our borough. These officers work with professionalism, courtesy, and concern for the safety of all. I have great confidence in Mayor Deutsch, Council President Muderich, Police Chief Gallagher, Fire Chief Dixon, and Borough Manager Metrick in leading our community through such difficult times. I also want to say that I have the utmost respect for police officers who serve and protect, because they make the choice every single day to serve in a profession where they put themselves at risk to keep others safe. On a daily basis, they answer calls where they see the worst in human nature, and yet they must respond with respect for the dignity of the people involved. They have to be on guard at all times while de-escalating potentially dangerous situations. These are true talents requiring highly skilled professionals. And I need to ask how many of us could do that job well. But police officers are human, and none of us are immune to the systemic racism that we were raised in. Prejudice exists in every community. And I often say Narberth is my dream town because I always wanted to live in a front porch community where neighbors look out for each other. And I do feel so blessed to live here, but I've also been shocked by what I've heard from some Narberth residents. One who complained of the unwashed non-residents using our parks. One who complained about adults with disabilities working in our town. And another who said we need to kick out the immigrants. My husband has heard neighbors say derogatory things about Jews. My neighbor was asked if he came to this country illegally simply because of his accent and the color of his skin. If we are being honest with ourselves, we've all heard family, friends, or neighbors say prejudiced things. And that's because we, as Americans, have inherited a system that is full of institutional racism. And we can't afford to ignore that reality any longer. It's tearing our communities apart. Our economy was built in part on slavery and the exploitation of immigrant workers, and we clearly see the resulting economic injustices today. Our educational system was built on segregation, and today, too many schools lack diversity and funding for even the most basic student needs. Our system of government was built while disenfranchising people of color, and even today, some government officials are trying to strip thousands of eligible voters of their right to vote by using illegal voter purges. Our criminal justice system has institutional racism in all areas, from stopping and frisking to arrests to trials, jury verdicts, and sentencing. One only need look at our own government data to see how convictions and sentencing for the same crime differ dramatically based on the race of the alleged criminal and victim. Mass incarceration disproportionately robs Black people of their liberty. The United States makes up 5% of the world population, but we lock up close to 25% of the world's prisoners. That's more people, that's more of our citizens than Russia and China lock up. It has been 528 years, half a millennium, since white Europeans immigrated to the Americas and began brutalizing people of color, all the while justifying white violence by calling other human beings savages. We've made some progress, but the tragic repetition of that pattern this month, this week, was a breaking point. A prophetic visionary once said, "We've come too far to turn back now," and that's where we are today. Our nation has much to account for, and we must start right here in Narberth. Together as a community, we can reject discrimination and end this cycle of violence. We can bring love into politics in a fierce and unapologetic way. We can follow the teaching of Dr. Martin Luther King, who taught us that hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Narberth can come together across color lines and party lines to work together to end systemic racism in our own community. We can work together to protect the safety of both citizens and of our police officers. As a member of Borough Council, I am committed to ensuring that Narberth works toward best practices in anti-racism, de-escalation, and professional training for our officers in order to safeguard our residents and our visitors. We must research all tools available to us to serve and protect our community. I'm also committed to pushing for anti-racism training for all borough staff, elected officials, and Narberth Fire Department volunteers, because this is about dialogue and transformation. It's about recognizing each other's common humanity and not about creating more division. I am truly honored to serve with our current team of elected officials, staff members, and volunteers who I trust and respect and who work with integrity to better our community. We have a real opportunity with this team to make Narberth a model of best practices in policing, public service, and equity. But the last thing I want to say is that government officials and staff cannot do this alone. Narberth residents are an integral part of this effort. We all are affected by the bias that we were raised in. So we all have a responsibility to call out prejudice when we see it in our own circles. So I'm asking, go out of your comfort zone and listen to people you don't normally speak with. Learn from other people's perspectives. Be the change that you want to see. Reach out to people of color and ask them how you can support them in this time. Reach out to our police officers and thank them for their service. Be kind to each other. These are painful times. We are all suffering, but these are the ways we will begin to heal our wounds together. And maybe, just maybe, if we can all learn from each other and move forward in this community, perhaps we can forge a path for other communities to begin healing too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. It's a privilege to have you with us. I want to reiterate that we do have such excellent leadership, as you say, with our police chief and our fire chief, and I want to thank them again, and also the mayor in coordination with our police chief. But I agree that as a committee going forward, we do want to be proactive and see what policies we might want to consider together with the mayor, so that we're in the best possible position, so that as you say, we can be a model community. Andrea or Bob, would either of you like to say anything?
Mona, I'd like to thank Mona for those very heartfelt and wonderful words. I don't have anything specific prepared, but we are endeavoring to serve this community with our police force to the highest standards, and provide equitable and fair and non-discriminatory service at all times. We're going to keep working on training and ways to increase awareness and do the very best we can by everybody in the community, everybody of all colors and persuasions and ethnicities. Everybody should receive fair treatment across the board, and that is justice. And we will endeavor to do that at the highest levels at all times.
Thank you, Mayor. Bob, would you like to add anything?
I would. Mona, thanks really aren't enough. Just to say, I'm listening. I'm really listening very deeply to the words that you wrote and read to us. And I'm very aware as I listen that I don't even realize the extent of my own privilege. And so I'm just going to recommit myself to listening and listening and listening beyond what I think many people perceive as grievance, to how do we create a better world? How do we mend the world? And I can hear, like, sort of in between the lines of what you've written there, you're pointing the way. And at this point, it's like, I just need time to absorb and continue to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I would like to suggest that as a committee, we draw on the expertise of the Human Relations Commission. Perhaps they might have recommendations going forward. And I'd be happy with your approval. I would be happy to connect with their chair, Andy Charles, to see if they have any recommendations.
So, Rob, interestingly, I received a statement from the Human Relations Committee today on behalf of our president, Aaron Mutter, because I'm tagged in for him for the moment while he's with his family. And I invited, they've written a beautiful statement, and I invited them to read it tonight at the council meeting. So, and I would like to actually ask the manager if he would I sent a clip, a Zoom. I may have sent the correct Zoom address to the person who's attending. I'm not sure, but I will, I think I'll forward it to you, and you can just check to see if she's got it correctly. So one of the members of the Human Relations Committee is planning to attend the meeting tonight. And I guess I'd like to ask, rather than have them read it at public comment, to amend the agenda when we get to the meeting. At the appropriate time, we'll amend the agenda so they can have a spot there in our discussion time.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I'm glad that they're already connected. Okay, well, thank you all. I really appreciate those comments. So next we want to move to a discussion of the yellow phased opening scheduled for June 5th. And I'm going to admit Ed Ridgway from the Narberth Business Association, and I'll ask the mayor and the borough manager to guide us in this discussion. We have about 15 minutes or so for this discussion. And I know that the mayor and the manager have been meeting already and have some recommendations for us to consider. Around 7:05, I would like to shift to the EAC update. I'd like to table the discussion of the EMC as the chief can't be with us tonight. And so I'd like to revisit that question in July. So I will admit Ed Ridgway and ask the mayor if you could lead us off.
Okay, I'm happy to. So getting into Governor Wolf's orders, it looks like on Friday, June 5th, we are going to go from the red phase with stay-at-home orders into the yellow phase. And like a stoplight, the yellow phase is an interim step before you get to the green phase. And the green phase is not go back to business as usual, but it's again a freeing of a lot of the restrictions that are. Everybody, I'm sure, will be glad to hear. And by the way, I've been working with the emergency management team, Sean Metrick, Chief Gallagher, and we've gone over many of the suggestions and tried to make the best guidelines as possible. We will significantly, if not exclusively, be following the guidelines as given by Governor Wolf and the CDC for the opening of certain things. So let's start with Narberth Public Spaces. The parks, playgrounds, and fields. The Narberth Park Fields will be open for limited use. That's the Sabine Avenue grassy area and the fields down at the Narberth Playground. We will be following the CDC guidelines for parks, and this means please stay at home if you're not feeling well, if you're feeling sick or unwell. Use social distancing of at least 6 feet between individuals on the field unless you're a family unit. And at this time, organized sports and activities are not allowed. We will revisit that in the green phase and we'll again look at the CDC guidelines. The Narberth Park tennis courts will be open, but we ask again that you play singles tennis and maintain social distancing while using the courts. The basketball courts will remain closed as basketball is a sport that requires close contact. The Narberth Park Playground, aka Candy Cane City, is going to be closed at this time just because it's very difficult to maintain sanitizing standards on the equipment, and we just don't have the ability to keep it safe. The Narberth restrooms, the moment will remain closed. We will be revisiting this as early as Monday of this coming week to try and figure out a schedule and how we can make them open as much as possible while keeping people safe. So we will be revisiting that. That's not a permanent closure. Use of the fields will follow the guidance from the state and just the CDC guidelines. Let's moving on to 80 Windsor Avenue, which is the library building. The library will be open with limited service, no contact services. So I think that they've released a memo on how they plan to operate, but you can start returning your books and you can reserve books to be given out curbside, I believe. The American Legion and Girl Scout rooms will currently remain closed. We're waiting on some further notice and information. We're waiting to receive certain information from parties using those. until we receive the information requested for the moment they will be closed. We will revisit that as well. 100 Conway, which is the Borough Building. The borough operations will remain open. Most of all business will be handled remotely, such as permits and tax payments, and service-related issues will be handled remotely as they have been during the past 3 months. Any business that requires a face-to-face meeting will be done by appointment only. So you call the office, make an appointment, and there will be safety guidelines to follow if meeting in person, so that we can all remain safe. Public meetings will continue to be held remotely via tele and video conferencing, just like we're doing now, Zoom. And the borough buildings will not be available for use by non-borough organizations. So that goes to Narberth public space. I want to talk a little bit about work restrictions under the yellow, opening of businesses under the yellow phase of Governor Wolf's orders. Telework should continue where it's possible. So if you've been successfully doing telework and it's not interfered in any way with your operations, you should continue to do that as much as possible. Childcare may be open, complying with guidance. Businesses with in-person operations must follow business and building safety orders, and certain life-sustaining businesses that cannot conduct either or part of their operations via telework are permitted to conduct in-person operations, and certain non-life sustaining businesses, i.e. retail shops that have not been open, will be permitted to restart their in-person operations through the loosening of some restrictions that were in place under the stay-at-home order. Keep in mind, businesses in the Commonwealth that are permitted to conduct in-person operations during the disaster emergency must take precautions to protect their employees' families, the community at whole, to protect everybody from a resurgence of this virus. All businesses conducting in-person operations must review the governor's guidance and commit to ensuring the health and safety of their employees and the public. The full list of rules and regulations is voluminous, it's huge, and I can't go over each and every operation, each and every one here, but there are some highlights that I want to just point out because I think they're very applicable to businesses in the borough. Clean and disinfect high-touch areas routinely in accordance with CDC guidelines. So handles and things that the public and various members of your employees touch a lot, keep them clean with the tools that the CDC recommends. You must have enough employees to control order and enforce social distancing at least 6 feet within your business. You need to establish protocols for execution upon discovery that someone in the business or a customer or someone in the business has come down with COVID-19. So those are extensive protocols. And if you go on if you need help, I can show you, but it's on the governor's website. If you find out somebody's come in with COVID and everybody's been exposed, you have to take these steps. You should stagger work start and stop times for employees when it's practical to prevent gatherings of large groups entering and leaving the store at any time. If you can, meetings and trainings should be conducted virtually. If a meeting must be held in person, limit the meeting to the fewest number of employees possible, not to exceed 10 employees at one time, and maintain a social distance of at least 6 feet during those meetings. You need to provide employees access to regular hand washing with soap or hand sanitizer. Make sure break rooms stay clean, and break rooms, locker rooms, any common areas for the employees must stay clean. You need to provide masks for your employees to wear during their entire time at the business, and make it a mandatory requirement to wear masks while on the work site. The only exceptions are if they're in the break room eating or drinking, and must be limited to as little as possible to go without your mask. And by the way, the employers may approve masks obtained or made by the employees. If they have their own masks, they can wear them as long as they're in accordance with the Department of Health guidelines. Where feasible, business should conduct business with the public only if it's possible. And to the extent that it's not feasible, businesses must limit occupancy to no more than 50% of the number stated on their certificate of occupancy and for the business. And those who are there, even at 50%, need to maintain that 6-foot distance for checkout lines and any other lines they may be in. They need to have an employee who is on top of that and make sure customers are not getting too close to one another. If you can, you should install shields or barriers at the registers and checkout to make sure there's a physical barrier and distance between the cashiers and personnel, and make sure, again, in those lines that people are 6 feet apart. You need to require that all customers wear masks while on the premises and deny entry to individuals not wearing masks. This has come up before. Unless the business is providing medication or medical supplies, masks need to be worn. And then in the alternate, you can do curbside service or pickup service. That's an alternative if somebody does not have a mask or does not want to wear a mask. The one exception is if you have someone who cannot wear a mask due to a medical condition, they can enter the premises and they're not required to provide documentation of the medical condition. So if someone comes in and says they have a medical condition, they can't do it, they're not required to provide. Also, children under 2 are not required to have masks. And finally, you need to schedule regular hand washing breaks for employees every hour. Make sure sanitation is maintained. I just want to separate now and talk for a moment about restaurants. Beginning Friday, restaurants and retail food service businesses in the yellow are permitted by takeout and delivery sales, which they have been, but now they're allowed to do outdoor seating dining, as long as they strictly adhere to the requirements of the guidance, including maximum occupancy limits, and maintain the requirements as stated in the governor's order. So we will see some more outdoor dining, but they must be socially distant, and the guidelines in the governor's order of yellow phase must be adhered to. So that is a long-winded but detailed, thorough, some details on the yellow phase. If you have additional questions, we'll be fielding them as we go along, and we'll be seeing what works, seeing what doesn't.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Do you want to discuss with Ed Ridgway here? Do you want to discuss anything further?
I'd be happy to. There's been some, we're trying to help those businesses, and we recognize that the restaurants have suffered greatly under this, under the protections for COVID-19. And even though they've been doing takeout, and their lack of dine-in services has affected everybody. So we're trying to come up with some ways that the borough can help them that are within the borough's means. And Ed, do you want to talk about some of the things?
Yeah, I can talk. It looks like my video's off, but I can talk. Yeah, we had talked about a number of solutions to possibly use. We had talked about a couple of solutions for using some borough assets to increase social distancing. I'm anticipating that a couple of restaurants at least are going to have tables out, starting Friday when we go to the yellow phase, and in order to head off conflict between pedestrians and restaurants, I had suggested that we brainstorm ways to make it easy for the populations to, coexist and be able to socially distance, without police having to get involved, without businesses having to, be violating some rule that they're not trying to violate. So, I'm open to suggestions for how the borough can help them do that.
Okay, Ed. So
we had discussed, possibly blocking off parking not for tables, but to allow a space for pedestrians to safely walk 6 feet away from tables that are on the sidewalk, because some of the sidewalks are not so wide. But I'm waiting on Sean to jump in here. There were some glitches with that. Or Ed Harmon, if you want to talk about some glitch, how that may or may not work.
Andrea, Rob, I'm trying to call Sean because he dropped off and texted me that he's in the dark right now. So we'll see what's happening.
No.
Try to figure out what's happening technically.
Okay.
Well, I can voice my opinion, which follows Chief Gallagher's opinion of public safety and pedestrians in roadways, and trying to provide proper barricades for that, occasion. And I think it needs to be more of a permanent type of barricade versus a temporary barricade, where the suggestion was that we take it down and put it up every day. So I follow the chief's rule as far as public safety. I agree with him, and I would like to see a more permanent structure, whether it's in the municipal lot or parking spaces. But I think it needs to be a permanent status.
So, but if we did it in a parking area, though, that would permanently take away certain parking on the road.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that's the conflict, is you're trying to bring people into the borough. However, you're taking away parking spaces. So you have a conflict of interest.
Okay, so thank you, Ed, and the mayor. Maybe I could suggest, Andrea, that we take this up with the full council, this question. Do you think that's appropriate?
We could. I think the opinions we're also gonna need the opinions of business owners, and because this is gonna affect them. And we had a meeting with some business owners, and threw out some suggestions for possibilities of opening certain public spaces and things that we thought were very workable. Turns out, as a practical matter, were not as workable from a business owner's perspective, and that even though we'd open up a parking lot or Station Circle or something like that, they found that would not be particularly helpful to them. So I want to make decisions that include the more of the parts.
May I suggest, Rob, that this conversation take place offline with the mayor and the business association, because the council actually don't have the authority to make any of these decisions. I mean, we can give our opinions to the mayor if she wants them, but ultimately she will have to determine what to make legal. And so I was on the phone with Sean, who's actually in Great Valley in a hotel. A tree fell on his house today at 1:00. So now his family's been displaced to a hotel. There's a massive storm happening there at this moment. The storm is coming our way. So, and if we do get disconnected on this call, we just, if everyone can just, we can go into sort of text mode. I can sort of try to communicate with Sean, and you can communicate with me, and we'll try to get the meeting back up and running as soon as possible, should we go down. And in any case, I missed the nugget of the choice or the decision that, Rob, you were thinking council might want to weigh in on. So could you just repeat that?
So Ed Harmon was just suggesting that we have a more permanent barricade rather than a temporary one, so that it doesn't have to go up and down each day to protect, say, tables and parking spaces. So that was really the one question.
I tend to agree with that. I think if that's something that the borough can offer, and the mayor's in agreement with that, I think the question is whether or not the businesses are interested in accepting the offer. But I mean, I think we're doing our best to come up with an accommodation. Does that sound about right to you, Ed?
Which Ed?
Ed,
Ed Ridgway. Oh, sorry, Ed Ridgway.
Yeah. If you're making an offer, then, I can take that offer to the businesses and tell them it's an offer. This is happening on Friday. On Friday, there's going to be tables on the sidewalk, whether we have barriers for the pedestrians to go around or not. There's going to be tables on the sidewalk on Friday.
And Mayor, that's
trying
the deal, Mayor, is that there's going to be, my family will be out there. We'll be walking around the cars into the traffic to get away from the people on the sidewalk. That's what I've been doing for the past 12 weeks anyway. So I'm not sure, you could just say, this is the accommodation we're going to do for public safety. We're going to put up permanent barriers in the street so that pedestrians have a detour around the tables. And that's the way it's going to be. And then it's just, for people who wish there was parking, well, that's going to be too bad. It's done in the name of safety, if that's your assessment. And I think, I think the police chief felt that was a much safer option than having dining in the street. And I think I also felt that he felt it was a safer option than having pedestrians walking between the cars and out into the street to get around the crowds on the sidewalk.
Right. So the other option was temporary barriers versus permanent. And I'm hearing for the first time tonight that that permanent barriers would be the only option.
Well, there you go. So it's either temporary or permanent barriers or nothing, it sounds like.
Yeah. And
So-
what's that?
So I just want to say, I think it's worth thinking about and considering. And you look at towns like Westchester, who are deciding to shut down an entire street to give more distancing options to their stores. But I think one important thing to consider, and Mayor Deutsch mentioned this a little bit earlier, Ed Ridgway, is that I think it would be important for this decision also to see some data from business owners about how all the business owners feel about whether taking away parking spaces would hurt their business or not. So I recall there was one business in town that no longer is in town that used to say that music festivals made their business go way down. So I think it's something worth considering. I think it's important to have some data from business owners all along the area affected. How many of them think that taking parking spaces away would hurt their businesses? Because that's a decision that really the NBA needs to make, but I think that's important data to look at as well.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so Ed, both Eds, I want to thank you. We're running short on time, so we're going to have to continue this conversation with the council, with the mayor, and with you, Ed Ridgway, and the staff. So I'm hopeful that we can come to a solution quickly in support of the businesses. But we don't have the time now, unfortunately, to decide that fully. Okay, so thank you, Ed Ridgway, and we'll keep talking. I hope we can resolve this quickly. We have now only 10 minutes to move to our next item, which is the EAC, and they have prepared some updates for us with regard to the carbon inventory. Jesse Little's here, as well as Joe Toscano and Rob Schlake. So around 7:20, I need to then move to public comment. I'm sorry our timing is so tight, but whatever you would like to share. Jesse, we'll start with you as chair.
Sure, and I'm just going to turn it right over to Joe and Rob, who have been working hard on the climate action planning draft. It's a great model of collaboration between our citizen activists and the EAC and borough staff. So I'm really appreciative of their efforts, and so I'll leave it to them.
Okay, thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse. Rob, can you allow me to share my screen?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think I'm going to make you host for the moment.
Great. You can. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, great. Let me just get that set up. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. And Rob Schlack, please jump in as I'm talking.
Yep.
with anything you'd like to add. Thank you, guys. So we're just going to really briefly, in a few minutes here, I just want to show you what EAC and CAN, the citizen group working on climate action, have put together for Narberth's greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and just show you some of the information we can get from the ICLEI ClearPath tool that we've been using this, and how we're going to use that going forward to develop our climate action plan. So just by way of background, as you all know, last April in 2019, the borough adopted a resolution to transition to 100% renewable energy, where we set the goal of transitioning 100% for electricity by 2030 and heating and transportation by 2040. So that's more ambitious than some of our colleagues in other municipalities. And so we're one of the leaders in that. And the comprehensive plan, which was adopted last May, reflects that as well. Last fall, CAN, our group, Climate Action, NARBS, and NEARBS, formed to help the borough meet those goals and work with EAC and work with the community on ways we can reduce our emissions. So one of the first goals we have to accomplish in doing that is developing a climate action plan. This basically will tell us, where we're starting from, where we have to get to over the next 10, 20 years in order to get to zero net emissions, and what actions we can take to accomplish those goals. And ICLEI and ClearPath, the ClearPath tool that ICLEI gives us access to, is really helpful in doing that. And so what I want to show you just in a couple minutes here are what we've already done with it and what we'd like to do going forward. So ICLEI and ClearPath allows us to track our emissions over time, forecast for future emissions based on goals, and so on. So it's a really useful tool as we implement this climate action plan going forward. ICLEI is a network of local and regional governments, internationally, in fact, not just around the US. There's a lot of resources they provide. As I mentioned, ClearPath is the tool they use. They give us for tracking and forecasting emissions. That's one of the things I'll show you in just a moment. And there's also a very active community of government officials, members of other EACs, and volunteers working on similar goals. So there's a lot of useful information we can get working with them in the tools they have available. Over the last year, we've been a participant in the ICLEI Pennsylvania cohort, and there's two tasks that we need to accomplish over this. One is to complete a baseline inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions, which we now have, and I'll show you in a moment. And the second, to develop a climate action plan, which we're hoping to have a draft of by the end of this month. Going forward, the goal is to implement, monitor, and evaluate that climate action plan as we move towards getting to zero emissions. So the data that we have this is our baseline. This represents sort of the starting point for our climate action plan. This comes from 2015 estimates of our emissions in Narberth from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, which conducts studies and provides a lot of data for the entire region and then breaks that down by municipality. And so all of that information has now been entered into ClearPath for Narberth. Here's the big picture overview. So that graph on the left shows you the kinds of reports we can generate, for example, from ClearPath about where our emissions are coming from in terms of residential energy, commercial energy, transportation, and so on. And on the right are just the numbers I put together for Narberth based on those data. So as you can see, heating for both residential and commercial use accounts for the biggest chunk of our emissions by quite a bit. Transportation is the next biggest part, and then electricity. Those are the reasons we focus on those resolution as well, because they account for the vast majority of all of our emissions. And so we can really easily pull this information out. One of the nice things about ClearPath is it puts all of this information together in one place so that we can divvy up how much emissions are being generated by these different sources. Just to drill down on that further, we can get information on emissions from heating oil, for example, for heating versus natural gas versus electricity generation. These are the data for Narberth for residential use. Similar data for commercial use. And so we can use that now, not just inventory, but to plan going forward. Same thing for transportation. So most of our emissions for transportation comes from cars driving on trucks on the road. A small proportion from rail use, because SEPTA's electricity use isn't 100% renewable yet. And so there's a small contribution there as well. So these are the kind of data that we can get. There's a lot of other tools in ICLEI. I don't have I'm just going to go real briefly just in the interest of time here because I know we're out of a tight schedule. We can generate forecasts from this. So we've got this inventory now of our 2015 emissions. We can generate forecasts going forward. This is an example just from their manual. We not for Narberth, but we'll develop our own as we build the climate action plan of, what types of scenarios can we see in terms of our emissions if we adopt this or that different goals. And it allows us to really easily compute sort of if we take certain actions, what effect would that have on our emissions? So if 20 households in Narberth switched their electricity to a renewable energy supplier, we can really easily estimate how much that should reduce our emissions and then track whether or not we're meeting those goals as we go forward. And so it's really useful for generating that kind of report. Another thing that's very useful in ICLEI is that it converts everything for us into a common metric. So all the emissions are measured in the equivalent of CO2. And that's really useful when we're taking as input data electricity in kilowatt hours, natural gas usage, heating oil in gallons and things like this, and converting that to a common measure so that we can actually track those emissions from all these different sources, put them together, and see where we have to, make progress in different areas.
Hey, Joe, I was just going to ask Rob if he knew what carbon dioxide equivalents were. So that
Yeah, could you just explain it briefly, Rob?
Yeah, because everything gets converted to that common unit. It's important that GHG global. Our emissions have a natural heat trapping capacity, which varies by gas, and humans produce more carbon dioxide than any other GHG, and we count emissions of GHGs based on how each GHG's heat trapping capacity compares to CO2. And so this is called the CO2 equivalent. And we measure GHGs in metric tons of CO2, and you'll see the E subscript, and that means equivalent. So you're looking at the heat trapping ability of each individual gas in the inventory. And you just convert it to what's important in the atmosphere for climate change.
Okay, thank you.
There's a lot of other tools. We don't have time to go into all of this right now. We can track emissions from borough government operations as well. There's a whole separate tool just for doing that. And just to give you some examples, other communities have used ClearPath to develop their climate action plans. Bedford, New York's a good example. These are just a couple of graphics from their report to show how they've, quantified their emissions similar to the graphs I showed you for Narberth. Similar for Binghamton, New York. This is an example of the government emissions. So you can see there's some different categories there that are accounting for different kinds of emissions. Some of this wouldn't necessarily apply to Narberth, but there's lots of different tools and different ways we can enter information to make it useful for us. And then this is just one other example, again, from Bedford, where they use this to plan going forward what types of actions would not only result in certain amounts of reductions of CO2 equivalent emissions, like they show here. This is for if they were to energy efficiently retrofit their town facilities, but also the cost and the estimated time to pay back in terms of the savings from those energy reduction costs and things like that. So it's really useful for making those kinds of plans too. And as we develop the climate action report, that will be really important to have. I think I will just finish up there. So again, our goal in developing that is to use ICLEI and the ClearPath tool to track our emissions, forecast going forward, and assess what's going on. And we just got a tornado warning.
Okay, Joe, thank you so much.
Yep.
If you don't mind handing the host hat back to me.
Oh yeah, I will do that. And I'll end right there, actually. That's perfect.
And Jesse, Rob in particular, who's been working on this all year. My hope is that we can schedule at the end of June, we can schedule a public forum to look more closely at the data that we have and develop our draft climate action plan. So I'm thinking of scheduling that in the 4th week of June, but I'll connect with Jesse and all of you around that. But I think already from what you've shown us, we can see how this software and your hard work can support better decision making. So thank you. Thank you all very much. And I will stay in touch so we can schedule public forum. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your support and leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Rob.
Thank you all. Okay, now we have to move quickly to public comment. So I'm going to admit we have two folks who've been waiting very, very patiently. If anyone, I see Diana Day, if you would like to make a public comment.
Oh boy.
If anyone, I see Diana Day, if you would like to make a comment.
Just, yeah, tornado warning. Tornado warning. Should we take shelter? Yeah, tornado warning. Tell her to get out of the shower. Immediately.
Everybody's.
Deanna, can you hear us? Would you like to speak?
Tell her to get out.
Okay, I'm going to go next to French. It shows up as French.
Hi.
Would you like to speak?
That's Pete French.
Shows up as French.
Yes, it's for Peter and Missy. Yes, we would.
Pete French.
I think a lot of feedback here. For Peter and Missy. Yes, we would.
Okay, maybe the rest of it.
Back here.
Yeah, something weird is happening with the Zoom. I don't know if it's the tornado.
Okay.
We're having really terrible weather at the moment.
Weird is happening with the Zoom.
We're having really terrible weather at the moment. Really terrible weather at the moment.
Yeah, it's on.
Why does it keep repeating?
Really, you put your earbuds on, by the way, and you hear them better. What are you in for?
Oh goodness.
I guess it comes.
Can anyone hear anything at all? Because I can't hear anything.
We're having technical problems, I think, as the tornado passes through. So there are two folks here that want to make public comment. And we do have a couple minutes more. So I'm just going to try one more time. This is Diana Day. Diana, can you hear us? Would you like to speak? Would you like to speak?
A big loop going on.
Feedback loop.
The audio's on, Diane. I got.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I believe we're under a tornado warning right now.
Is public comment.
But I believe we're under a tornado warning right now.
Okay, we're going to have to end the meeting.